First, I want to share a quote from Charles Fillmore that I found that was written in the early 20s. And for those of you that don't know, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were the new thought thinkers that are the founders or the originators, whichever word you'd like to use, of unity itself and everything that has become since then. And in the, geez Louise, so right around the Civil War time, there were lots of new thought thinkers out there speaking, but there was no internet, and mail and newspapers had to be gone by horseback. So some of them, being in different pockets of the United States, didn't know that they were all like doing some of the same stuff and then weaving themselves together. Everybody can hear me okay today? I'm trying to speak loud enough. I know I can get soft, so just, don't be afraid to wave at me if I start getting too soft. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore were two of those new thought thinkers. And I didn't bring the book with me today, which you guys know I have this like handbook of a lot of the new thought thinkers. And it's always struck me that the Fillmores somehow didn't get in that anthology book that I have. But again, there's a lot of them. So maybe there'll be another anthology with even more of them down the line. Charles lived a pretty long life. He didn't die until around 1948. And he was at least 93 years old. I didn't write those down, so those are coming from memory. Those of you that, Joe, I must have remembered correctly because you're going, yes. So his full lifespan, but so this is 1923, these quotes. There was a healing conference that was held, and you guys all know that he spoke a lot. But this is where we're going today. I'm going to say at the beginning, and then after I break it apart a little bit, I'm going to say it again at the end. So he says, there is but one power. We use it as we will. If we send it out by our thought and word in hate, it destroys. But if we send it out in love, it builds. So there are not two powers, there's one. And those two ways of using power. So there's not like an evil and a really good. There's one, and humanity chooses. I love that I found this from 1923 because I was actually in debate with somebody online recently, and I'm like, wait. I know that's in there somewhere, and here it is in 1923. And then he also says, God or spirit does what humanity says it shall do. Spirit is our servant. Have you ever thought about how wonderful that really is? That the Spirit of God, out of which everything is made, is here at all times, is always present and with us, and is us, and we are using Spirit. We are using God. How do we get there? That might be the biggest thing. How do we get there? How do we get to the realization that we are the universe, that we are, and this is, I didn't like write down where this came from, but but also in the Fillmore text, we are 100% human and 100% God, right? And Jesus actually says, 100% human, 100% God, right? But how do we reconcile that? How do we reconcile that? And in order to do that, we need to recognize that we notice it, and following the truth that we know, it's one of the principles. How do we follow the truth that we know? Well, we need to recognize where our perception is at any given time, right? And we all have a different, and I know I talked about this before. Remember the long time ago, the metaphor with the cats in the boxes? that I use. You know, we are actually each like a little cat, and we each have our own little favorite box. And some of those are tall, and some of them are wide, and some of them are really dinky, and some of them are squished, right? And the only way to get beyond is for the cat to get maybe on top of the box, and then maybe hop around in all the different boxes, and maybe even peek into some other boxes to recognize perceptions. And maybe even do different, I'm going to call them levels. I don't like the word levels because it really makes it sound like somebody's better than somebody else in the level. But it's the only word I could, that feels right in the English language here. And there's like 4 levels of consciousness. Actually, depending on who you read, there could be up to 12, but we're going to stick to 4 today. All right. And the first level is a to me level, right? So we recognize the world as everything coming to me. Now, the coolest thing I think about these levels is that through our growing up process from infant to adulthood, we all experience a version of these, right? So it's not just a big societal or philosophical thing, it's actually something that we have to grow up in as well. So the to me phase is like being a baby, because everything does come to you. And if it doesn't, you're no longer here, right? So we learn from that aspect first. It's a little self-centered. It can be disempowering, because if we're waiting for everything to come to us all the time, we're not looking for anything. We're always just waiting, right? Again, as a baby, not such a big deal, right? As an adult, we need to know how that works with us. Are we feeling powerless, or is our external focus, is everything separate from us, and we have to, and this is our world where everything is out here and we are here and things need to come to us. It's a little bit of a victim consciousness. So we're going to call that level 1, the to me level. The by me level, we could call the victor consciousness. So things happen by me. Think of a 3 or 4-year-old, right? Maybe minus the tantrums. So we have, I get to decide, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It happens by me. So that's the human part, the 3, 4-year-old stage. But it's also that nothing happens unless I do it kind of box perspective. So it's an internal locus of control. Everything, I control my experience, I control the world. That's by me. The vessel consciousness is the through me. And I would venture to guess that a lot of the people that we know, and maybe even ourselves, are in the through me. Again, none of these are positive or negative, they just are. It's just a recognition of where we're at in our perception, because our perceptions will determine how we are living the truth we know, right? We can't live through any other way other than our perception. The idea is to broaden perception. So if we broaden to the through me stage, or level, things come through me. I am a conduit of everything. That means things are external and they have to flow through me. It's more selfless than the by me phase, right? It's more selfless, but it also puts spirit, God, creation as way more powerful than we are. And then we have to allow that to come through us. And do we recognize God as being external, or do we recognize the isness of God? The it's me stage is called the verity consciousness. And that's where we stand in that full power of 100% divinity and 100% divine and 100% compassion and peace and love, but it's not flowing through us. It is us. So that part of each and every person that we're recognizing as the light is totally that, right? Their humanity might not be totally recognizing that light, right? But that, depending on the perspective, their humanity is running through. But that light is never ending, never changing, 100% there through everybody and everything. That doesn't change, right? That's the 100% divine part. It's the humanity that we recognize that reality through that perspective. So when Charles Fillmore says there is but one power, that's it. That light is it. That creation is it. That's the one power. And we determine how to use it, how to see it, and whether we are willing to expand our perspective. Now, expanding perspective is not comfortable. It's not comfortable. And even though I talked about 4 levels here, we could go on and on and on, because each level, there's more and more and more, right? It doesn't ever stop. There's no limit to that perception, because the 100% of us that's divine is limitless. So you keep recognizing that perspective over and over. Hopefully, I mean, I guess that's the challenge of humanity, right? The choice, and that's where your free will comes in. Are you choosing to be uncomfortable enough to expand perspective? And it is uncomfortable. And I think when we're ready to recognize that perspective, the more, that's when we get really uncomfortable, right? Because it butts up against what we think we already know. I have a quote in here from, sorry, my notes got wiggly here. Here he is, Eric Butterworth. Eric Butterworth says, God is spirit, present in its entirety at every point in space at the same time. And we recognize these things in some of the words we say. The light I am greets the light in you, right? We say these things. We see, go be the brightest light you can be. What I'm going to challenge you today is being the brightest light is recognizing the bright light you already are. Because it can't get any brighter. You're already that bright light. But are we recognizing it? Are we willing to do the work within ourselves to fully realize that? And again, I think when we are most uncomfortable, that's when we move. It's called creating space for healing, right? It's in that heart center. And that the exercise, the meditation we did at the beginning, where I asked you to touch your heart, when we touch our heart, it brings our attention there. So any place, and you do this anywhere you touch. So if you've scratched yourself and that's where your attention goes then, right? Because you're touching that, you're paying attention to that, you're making sure it's okay. I mean, that's just a natural part of being human. So in that, when we're creating space, we recognize, and this is measurable now through equipment, that our heart radiates that when we are in sync with that. And we can get in sync with our humanity, can get in sync with the divinity that we are by doing exercises like what we did at the beginning, that compassion, feeling joy, feeling caring, peace. And our heart sinks into that appreciation. It matches our humanity. They call it coherence. It matches with everything. And then they've also recognized, just like Charles Fillmore said, we get to choose, right? There's one power and we choose. Are we putting out the yuck, or are we putting out the compassion and the love. We choose, and either one goes out, right? And then it depends on the awareness of the individual that gets, we'll say, gets hit with that, right? So if we are a grumpy bump walking around at work, right? Well, there are some people that are going to be able to ignore your grumpy bumpiness, right? And go on with whatever. And other people will get grumpy along with you. The vice versa is also true. It doesn't mean we don't have grumpy, bumpy moments, because we're human, we got to, right? That's just part of it. But our chemistry tells us or recognizes that when we have a moment like that, if we allow it to actually go through us, within the span that it takes for a song to play on our radio, the chemistry is through us. It's gone, right? And then we get to choose. We can breathe with it and choose. So we're going to stay in that space, or are we going to decide to move out of it? We decide. So that electromagnetic field from the heart is real. It's measurable. Now, our equipment right now can measure it out to about 15 feet, and you can find that information on the Heart Math Institute. But they also say that we know it goes further, but our equipment can't measure farther than that right now. Working with things like that allow for the broadening of perspective, right? It allows us to, when we are hit with something that activates us or triggers us, or whatever your word is for that out in the world, or when we're talking to somebody, you know, those are the times, those uncomfortable times where we look and see, well, why is it that way with me right now? What is it really that irritated me, right? What is it really that just is driving me crazy? Because then that's when our perspective starts to widen, because we recognize our part in the whole thing, right? And when we recognize our part, we can have compassion, not just for ourselves in that moment, but also for the situation that reacted us in that way to begin with. It's a continual work, continual path. So kind of, it's all about us, right? It really is all about us and how we are willing to recognize the divinity. Because my divinity, and these are words that are paraphrased from Charles Fillmore too, our divinity is not a being, because spirit is not a being. The divine simply is, and we are the creators and manifestors. Because spirit's unchanging. It's our perspective and the way we use it that's always changing. So I'm going to read Charles Fillmore one more time, because it's a mouthful, right? There is but one power. We use it as we will. If we send it out by our thought and word in hate, it destroys. But if we send it out in love, it builds. There are not two powers, but two ways of using the one power. Spirit does only what humanity says it shall do. Divine is our servant. Did you ever think of that? That this wonderful spirit of creation, out of which everything is made, here at all times, is always present with us, and we are using that creation.